Hi, and welcome back to Sarougal. The airport Sanctuary is getting very close to completion. This episode will focus on the airport's lighting system, or Aerodrome lighting system that it's also referred to. It's been a real challenge, but after hours of reading through FAA documents and boarding PowerPoints in order to understand how it works, it's finally completed. If you're not familiar with how airports work, then the Aerodrome lighting system can be one of the most confusing elements to understand. So in an attempt to keep things as simple as possible, I will start with the very beginning of the end of the journey. You get it. I will start what the pilot sees when approaching the airport and continue with every element from there to the terminal gates. And what the pilot sees first is the ALS system, short for Approach Lighting System. An approach lighting system can look very different depending on airport size and ILS category, etc. In Sanctuary, I settled for a typical ALSF-2 system, which stands for High Intensity Approach Lighting System with Sequenced Flashing Lights. It consists of 247 steady burning lights, including 49 green threshold lights, red side row bar lamps, 9 rows 54 lamps, and 144 high intensity steady burning white lights, plus an additional 15 flashing lights, commonly referred to as strobes. The strobes flash in sequence, starting with the strobe farthest from the runway and ending with the strobe closest to the runway threshold. The lights are spaced at 30-meter intervals from the runway threshold outward to 731 meters. At the threshold, I've also placed rail lights, which stands for Runway End Identifier Lights. The system consists of 2 synchronized unidirectional flashing lights. The lights are positioned on each corner of the runway landing threshold, facing the approach area. The runway end lights are the red and green lights rows that you see at the runway thresholds. The green lights face approach direction, and red lights are seen when taking off from the runway. We're now looking at one of 2 displaced thresholds in the airport. Displaced thresholds are an extension of the runway that are only used for takeoffs, not landings. Therefore, I used in-pavement versions of runway end lights, so the planes are able to cross onto the main runway without, breaking any landing gear or something. There are no assets that are specifically created for this purpose, so I used one of Lasimir's in-pavement lights combined with green facade lights made by Targa to make the light effect a bit brighter. The red lights at the end of the runway made by Amit Politsai Thunk are the same lights placed at the runways without the displaced threshold, as there are no planes crossing them when taxiing, so in-pavement versions are not needed here. Stopways look like blast pads but are considered full-strength pavement and are suitable for support aircraft during an aborted takeoff. The stopway also has its own set of lights. It consists of 8 red lights at the end of the stopway, placed in 2 groups of 4 lights on each side that are blanked out in the approach direction. If it's not preceded by a displaced threshold, which is the case here, then there are red lights on the side as well, with the same distance as the normal runway edge lights. We will now leave the approach and threshold area and move on to runway itself. At the ends of the runway we have the Tdescent Lights, which stands for Touchdown Zone Lights. Tdescent Lights are additional touchdown zone lights and used for runways supporting low visibility operations. The system consists of 2 rows of white barrettes and extends 900 meters from the threshold. I used Lasimir's Tdescent assets for this. Tdescent lights should not be confused with the in-pavement ALS lights that are installed on a displaced threshold. They were similar in resemblance to each other but fills 2 very different functions. Tdescent lights are only placed after the landing threshold to guide pilots during landing. The displaced threshold, however, is for takeoff only and can't be used for landing. Next up are the puppy lights, short for Position Approach Path Indicator. You can see them here on the left side of the runway, which is standard. However, they can be placed on the right side as well if it's not possible to be placed on the left side. They should also be placed at the height of the runway aiming point. The puppy lights are here to provide visual help to determine the correct approach path. If the approach path is correct, then 2 lights are white and 2 are red. If it's too high, more of the lights are white, and if it's too low, more of the lights are red. We are now looking at the runway center lights. For category 3 operations, which is the case here, they are placed at 50 meter intervals. For other situations, they are placed at 30 meter intervals. The lights are color-coded depending on how close you are to the threshold. Seen from the pilot's view here, there are white lights from the start of the runway until 900 meters from the runway end. I've used Vasimir's light PV network for these lights. The following 600 meter are alternating white and red lights. To achieve this, I've used facade lights made by Targa, the white light in the takeoff direction and one red in the landing direction. The lights are covered with in-pavement props to give it the right look. The last 300 meters are only red lights. I've used Targa's facade lights here as well. The runway edge lights are also color-coded. Again, seen from the pilot's view here, they are white from the start of the runway. When 600 meters remain before the threshold, the lights turn yellow instead. In the case of a displaced threshold, as you see here, edge lights are red and yellow. The red lights face the approach direction and the yellow the depart direction. The distance between the lights are set to maximum 70 meter for category 3 operations, and the spacing should be uniform. But as taxiways cross the runway, it of course creates gaps, and when the gap exceeds 140 meters, then in-pavement fixtures are being installed to maintain uniform spacing, as seen here. We have now arrived at one of the airport's rapid exits. As I mentioned in my previous episode, rapid exits are basically taxiways linked to runways at an angle, ideally 30 degrees, that allow aircraft to exit the runway at high speed. Rapid exits each have 3 sets of the taxiway indicator lights that consist of 6 yellow lights in a 3-2-1 configuration. Each set of lights are spaced 100 meters apart. The single light is the last indicator light before the rapid exit begins, and it is situated 100 meters before the start of the turn. It should also be situated on the same side of the runway center line as the associated rapid exit taxiway. The taxiway center lights are, as you see here, alternating between green and yellow, which is required on runway approaches, rapid exits and inside ILS critical areas. Taxiway center line lights on a rapid exit taxiway should commence at a point at least 60 meters before the beginning of the taxiway center line curve. When not inside ILS critical areas, then the taxiway lights are green. I used the fountain green steady light made by Funk. The lights are spaced at 50 meters intervals. On curved taxiway segments, the lights may be required to be closer together. The edge lights are the blue lights on each side of the taxiways. They are placed at 15 to 60 meter intervals. On straight segments, they are placed further apart, and on curved segments, closer together, just like the centerline lights. I used the Taxiway Blue Lights network asset made by Vasimir for this. When we are about to enter the runway again, we will come across the guard lights. The flashing guard lights on each side are there to raise the situational awareness that you are about to enter the runway. Like I mentioned in my previous episode, it's usually only 1 pair of lights on each side. But in Charles de Gaulle Airport, my main inspiration for Saint-Creel, there are 2 pairs of lights on each side, so I decided to go with that instead. This episode has been packed with information, and I hope you found it useful. If you want more information about the airport markings, I recommend watching my previous episode, where I show and explain every marking in the airport. I'm gonna let you rest for a bit now with a cinematic tour of the airport. The next episode will be the last episode of the airport, except maybe for some cinematic short videos now and then. The last episode will focus on completing the cargo area that I've been working on for some time now. After that I will continue with the rest of Sarougal and the city itself, which I'm very excited about. If you have any questions or feedback, just leave it below in the comment section. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon for further updates. I'm also on Twitter and Reddit, where I post my work in progress quite often. Links to that are in the video description. I hope to see you next time. Thank you for watching, take care, and bye bye!